Good evening there, everybody. Boxing Realist here, and I hope you all are having a wonderful day today. The weight classes of the lightweight and super lightweight divisions have been quite the storylines as of late, with everything going back and forth, and with some of the most elite fighters in the weight classes going back and forth on impressive wins to unimpressive performances. And some of the fighters that are within these weight classes would be classified as some of the best pound for pound, or at least some of the more highly notable fighters within that of the sport of boxing, making these storylines all that much more interesting. Vasyl Lomachenko has gone AWOL without any notice or confirmation about his possible comeback. Shakur Stevenson is looked at as a world-class talent, but can seem to be as dominant as what he was in his prior weight classes, especially with the criticism of his punching power. Ryan Garcia had a triumphant comeback against Devin Haney in a fight not many expected him to win, just for the win to be overturned when he was eventually caught on PEDs, then comes back to face Rolly Romero and gets completely outboxed by him, a fighter who already had suffered 2 stoppage losses at that time, by the way. Devin Haney comes back after the poor performance over Ryan Garcia and beats former champion Jose Ramirez, but not in a super impressive fashion, looking like a shell of his former self. Gervonta Tank Davis gets a draw against a fighter with a 40% knockout ratio who lost to Jamel Herring not too long ago, and Teofimo Lopez, who had some of the more unimpressive performances of his career at 140, ends up coming back against the undefeated Arnold Barbosa Jr., who was a very dangerous contender at the time, and ends up impressing with probably the most dominant performance he's had in a while. It seems like it's a race to see who can win at competitive supremacy, but the consistency seems to be lacking with all of them. Whenever one fighter seems to start to take the lead, somehow they end up taking another step back in the process. And the worst thing is that a lot of these fighters haven't even fought each other yet. But the one fight that I'd personally love to see out of all these fights at the current moment in time is undoubtedly Teofimo Lopez versus Devin Haney. Both of these guys were dominant at the 135-pound weight class, then moving up to the 140-pound weight class to make their mark. And while Teofimo Lopez did suffer a loss to George Kambosos Jr., a fighter that Haney would later defeat on 2 separate occasions in dominant fashion, it seems that when Haney had that bad performance over Ryan Garcia, that things ended up evening up again, at least in terms of the all-around ranking. Haney usually had the consistency with his performances, and Lopez, although nowhere near as consistent, seemed to arguably have the slight resume advantage, beating a peak version of Lomachenko and also the undefeated Josh Taylor, who probably would have been top 10 pound for pound at the time he defeated him, leaving Lopez with 2 wins over top 10 pound for pound fighters, at least when they were debatably on the list. My point being is that it truly has been going back and forth in regards to who truly is the better fighter between the two. Lopez, in my view, had the more dominant performance of the 2 fighters over Vasyl Lomachenko, and a peak version at that, when Lomachenko would have been widely regarded as the number 1 pound for pound fighter. But Haney later on would defeat Lomachenko himself as well, and also hadn't suffered a loss, also defeating the same man that Teofimo Lopez had lost to in George Kambosos Jr. But then Haney ends up losing to that of Ryan Garcia, and yes, it was overturned, but it still was a fight that was not supposed to be that particularly close. And then, of course, he has not the most impressive performance over Jose Ramirez, a man that was dominated by Arnold Barbosa Jr., the same man that Teofimo Lopez just dominated in his last fight. So you would think that it's time to prove who is the real best of the two, right? Well, it appears that Teofimo Lopez isn't really interested in proving that point. Now, Teofimo has usually been willing to face a lot of the bigger names within the sport, and has proven this with the names that he has fought in his career, even fighting names that wouldn't be preferred fights for most, such as Sandor Martin or Jermaine Ortiz, with both of them having very tricky styles that could easily cause a loss on the wrong night for a particular fighter, and also with them not having enough notable recognition in their careers. He also has called out Jerome Boots Ennis at 147 pounds and has seemed quite serious about facing him. But whenever it comes to fighting that of a Devin Haney, this man doesn't appear to want any of the smoke. This also isn't the first time that Teofimo has seemed reluctant to fight Devin Haney, as in the past, Devin Haney has called Teofimo Lopez out, and Teofimo obviously seemed disinterested in the fight. And although Lopez has fought a lot of the big and challenging names in the sport, if we're going to be honest, Lopez is seeming to avoid that of a Devin Haney. Both of them recently have apparently received the deal to fight in August. Now, apparently how it went down was Devin Haney wanted the fight to happen at 147 pounds, while Teofimo wanted the fight at 140. Apparently they somehow met in the middle and decided to have a catchweight at 145 pounds. At least that's the testimony of Devin Haney. Teofimo has been quite quiet in relation to the negotiations, and to be honest, it seems like Teofimo Lopez wouldn't mind if they just quietly died out. Now, of course, many people may ask if he doesn't have a problem with fighting Jaron Ennis at 147, who would be clearly bigger than both him and Devin Haney, why would he have an issue with fighting Devin Haney at 147? And it is a very relevant question, but to be honest, I don't really blame Teofimo Lopez for wanting this specific fight at 140. Both Haney and Lopez reside at the current 140-pound weight class, but if you do take a look at the two of them, I think that it's obvious that Haney is the bigger of the two, not only being the more lengthy of the two fighters, but also rehydrating at a whopping 165 pounds for some of his fights even at that weight class, which I believe is even more than what Terrence Bud Crawford would rehydrate at for most of his fights at 147. And of course, why give up an advantage since you know that Haney would have a harder time making 140 at the current moment in time? And also on top of that, losing a fight like this would look even worse for your career because this is looked at as being more of an even playing field since both of you are around the 140-pound range. Losing to Ennis, although of course not being great in your career, would definitely be more forgivable and understandable since Teofimo Lopez would go up a weight class that he's never been to before and defeating a big welterweight with extreme level talent. But if you end up losing to a rival in Devin Haney and one that is more comparable in terms of size, there aren't many excuses that could really be made, and it could be a potential career killer or at least really hold Teofimo's career back. So I don't think it's a bad idea necessarily that he wants to fight at 140 pounds, but with Haney apparently alleging that they agreed to fight at 145, and with Teofimo willing to fight at 147 against Ennis, it does appear that Teofimo believes that fighting Devin Haney just isn't worth the risk. Now, did Teofimo actually agree to fight Devin at 145? We don't know with 100% certainty, but me personally, I do believe Devin Haney's account of the story. Say whatever you want to about Devin Haney, but other than Shakur Stevenson, Haney has seemed to be available to fight anybody at any given moment in time. He was willing to fight Lomachenko even when Loma was the best at 135. He was willing to fight George Kambosos in Australia on 2 separate occasions. He had called out Gervonta Tank Davis on a multitude of occasions as well. He also immediately went up to the 140-pound weight class and fought one of the better champions there in Regis Prograis. And of course also was willing to fight Teofimo Lopez even when the match could have been made earlier in previous years. Haney has been willing to take on all comers, and I think he deserves a massive amount of credit for that. Now, the question is Teofimo Lopez in fact ducking Devin Haney? Well, it depends on your opinion of what a duck actually is. For example, I don't consider Jaron Ennis turning down the Virgil Ortiz or Teofimo Lopez fights a duck necessarily. And although in my view those fights were clearly bigger than any of the fights at 147 for Boots, Ennis has made it quite clear that he does want to try and unify at the 147-pound weight class, and that neither of those fighters are at that weight class at the current moment. Now, if that decision will come back to haunt him, we'll see later on. But this current situation between Teofimo and Haney seems to be more of a clear situation of a duck, or at least more close to one of a duck than the Jaron Boots Ennis situation in my opinion. And the reason I have to call this a duck, or at the very least an avoidance by Teofimo Lopez, is because he had no problem fighting Jaron Boots Ennis at 147, but then Haney offered it at the exact same weight, and Teofimo didn't seem to want the fight, which tells me that he realizes the potential danger of a Devin Haney who could be at a good weight for himself at the weight. Now, of course, do I believe that Jaron Boots Ennis is a better talent than Devin Haney and someone that is more than likely going to be a bigger challenge or threat to Teofimo Lopez at that weight especially? Yes, personally I do. But as I stated, there's not as many excuses, and it could look worse for your career if you lose to a fighter more similar in size than if you had the excuse of going up in weight and losing to an extreme level talent and a fighter that's obviously bigger than you in that of Duran Boots Ennis. But with Devin Haney, there are really no built-in excuses. Not only that, but when we do also talk about it, I also believe that Teofimo truly believes that Haney is a super hard fight for him stylistically. We've seen faults in both of their styles, but if there does seem to be a chink in the armor of Teofimo Lopez, it would appear that it's the style of a highly defensive fighter who prefers to use their fast feet while moving in and outside of the range, making it hard for Teofimo to land shots and also cut off the ring and get the most amount of offense off as possible. And we've seen this style give Teofimo lots of fits in the past with Sandro Martin and Jermaine Ortiz. And even though I do believe there are certain things that may make Teofimo Lopez more skilled than that of a Devin Haney, as the saying goes, styles make fights. And Haney, in the way that he fights, could potentially be a super bad matchup for that of a Teofimo Lopez. And with him also having the reach advantage and also the possible speed advantage, not even to mention the weight, Devin Haney could potentially make Teofimo Lopez look really bad in a potential matchup, exposing holes not only in his feet, but also in his defense or offense when he tries to cut off the ring against Haney. It's unfortunate that it appears we won't be able to see this fight, but there isn't really much else to be said when it appears one of the fighters of the two doesn't really want this fight, and to be honest, doesn't seem like he ever wanted it in the first place. It's definitely odd because out of any time to try and fight Haney, you would think that it would be right now after Devin Haney looked super vulnerable and looks to be trying to find his former self. But one could also make the argument that that's actually the worst time to face somebody, as if they do end up beating you, it'll look all that much worse losing to a fighter that doesn't seem to be quite the same as his former self. And perhaps Haney's confidence in still wanting this fight, perhaps it scared Teofimo Lopez off. Maybe Teofimo Lopez also just doesn't like Devin Haney personally, and maybe he's trying to get at him by not giving him the fight. We have seen a strategy with this before with other fighters, but this also can be used as an excuse to avoid somebody. And to be honest, to me personally, it does seem like Teofimo Lopez is ducking Devin Haney. As talented as Teofimo Lopez is, I do believe he thinks that Haney is a very bad matchup and just isn't worth the risk, which is highly unfortunate because I think this fight could be a great matchup, and I would even understand not facing a fighter that doesn't have much notoriety or impact in terms of marketing, such as say when Araceli Lara or Demetrius Andrade wanted fights at 154 or 160 against some of the bigger names. But the thing is, Haney does have notoriety, and debatably more than Teofimo Lopez, and he's beaten some very big names in the sport. So I have no choice but to come to the conclusion that although some of the concerns Teofimo has may be logical, I do believe Haney's story about the negotiations, and I personally believe that this is a duck, especially since he's tried to make the fight before talking about Devin Haney, and he has really been the only side trying to make this fight happen even in previous years. Plus, Teofimo has been relatively silent about the negotiations, leading me to believe that he really doesn't want this fight. As much as I hope we do get this fight, Teofimo is obviously not interested, and I think he believes that Haney is just too much of a risk for the potential reward, and would rather fight anyone else than that of a Devin Haney. And this, in my personal view, would have to be classified as a duck. But anyways, let me know what you guys personally think. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Leave your comments and opinions down below, and hopefully y'all will have a wonderful day today, and I'll see you guys later.